In 1978, the Lucchese family and their associates would orchestrate and carry out one of the most lucrative thefts in American history, the Lufthansa Heist.
The idea for the heist came from two inside men, Peter Grunwald and Louis Werner, who worked for the German airline Lufthansa.
Werner was a degenerate gambler who was heavily in debt to loan sharks and was looking for a way to pay them off. Together, Grunwald and Werner brainstormed a plan of how they could rob a cash delivery being flown in from Germany and needed to find some outside people to take care of the job. After Grunwald failed to locate a group of people to handle the job, Werner approached his bookie, Marty Krugman, who was one of the people that he was in debt to, and informed him about the large amount of untraceable bills that was frequently flown in from Germany. He asked Krugman if he knew of anyone capable of handling the job, and Krugman in turn passed this information along to Henry Hill, who then shared the details with Jimmy Burke.
After Paul Vario greenlit the heist, Burke pulled in numerous people to assist with logistics surrounding the job. Werner provided Burke with a detailed sketch of the building's layout and elaborate alarm system, and details were mapped out at Robert's Lounge. The cut for each person involved was tentatively agreed upon, and they planned the job for around Christmas time. Burke then assembled a crew to handle the actual heist. That crew included his son Frank Burke, Tommy DeSimone, Angelo Seppi, Louis Cafora, Joseph Joe Buddha Manry, Paolo Lecastri, and Frenchie McMahon, their inside man from the Air France heist 11 years earlier. When Burke was alerted about a large cash shipment coming in early December, they decided to put the plan into motion. On Monday, December 11th, 1978, at around 3 a.m., 6 men in ski masks pulled up to the Lufthansa cargo warehouse in a black van, while Frank Burke drove in a separate crash car. They clipped the gate padlock with bolt cutters, then one group of men headed towards the building while 2 stayed in the van. 2 of the men headed to the lunchroom where most of the employees were on break, rounded them up at gunpoint and handcuffed them. One of the employees was ordered to call the night shift manager to lure him away from his office where he had access to a panic button. When the manager arrived, he was forced to tell them where the security guard and remaining employees were. The 2 thieves waiting in the van had removed their ski masks, and just when the robbery was underway, a warehouse worker noticed the van outside and approached to investigate. The 2 men then jumped out of the vehicle, chased after him, pistol whipped him, and forced him into the van. When a second warehouse worker heard screams and came outside, he too was forced in the van. Both employees got a look at the faces of the unmasked men. Now that all the employees were accounted for, the manager was then forced to disable the alarms and open the doors to the high-value room. They hauled 40 cartons of cash and jewels into the van and took off, the whole job taking 64 minutes. The thieves were long gone before the police showed.
Jimmy Burke and his crew had pulled off the largest cash heist in American history at the time, with an estimated take of $5.8 million in cash and jewels. Jimmy Burke, who was in possession of all the money and jewels taken in the heist, would disperse the cut to each person involved in the time and manner that he saw fit. But the joy of his biggest accomplishment wouldn't last long.
Composite sketches of the 2 unmasked thieves, based on the descriptions of the 2 employees who saw them, were released in the newspaper. When the employees were shown pictures, they believed the 2 men to be Angelo Seppi and Tommy DeSimone. Then there was the mistake of 31-year-old Parnell Stephen Edwards, who was known as Stax. Stax, who was played by Samuel Jackson in the film, had been friends with Tommy for years and hung around Robert's Lounge.
He was a gopher who ran low-level errands for the crew and was instructed to take the van to a mob-controlled junkyard in New Jersey for it to be chopped up. Instead, Stax made a pit stop at a lady friend's home in the Canarsie neighborhood of Brooklyn, where he spent the night getting high with her and left the van parked in a no-parking zone.
2 days later, on December 13th, a traffic officer placed a ticket on the van and later recalled that it resembled the one described as the getaway car in the Lufthansa heist. Authorities were alerted, and that same evening they located the vehicle, which had been stolen from Flushing, Queens 2 days prior. They took items from the van for examination and lifted fingerprints from the bumper and door.
Burke feared that the van would be tied back to him, so he ordered Tommy and Angelo Seppi to eliminate Edwards. On December 18, 1978, DeSimone and Seppi went to Stax's home in the Ozone Park neighborhood of Queens. As depicted in this scene, the unsuspecting Edwards allowed them in, where he was shot 6 times in the back and head. Marty Krugman would be next. He continually badgered Burke about how he was the one who helped set up the score and wanted his cut of the cash immediately. So Burke had a simple solution to this: take him out. The next month, he was killed and dismembered, reportedly by Burke and Seppi, and his body was never found.
And it wouldn't stop there. The heist had created a tangled web for Burke, and he now aimed to remove every expendable connection to him and the robbery in the months to come.
Burke was using his right-hand man, Tommy DeSimone, to eliminate people, but DeSimone himself would be the next to be eliminated. On or about January 14, 1979, DeSimone left his home in Queens and was never seen again. It's known that he was in fact killed, but here's where things get a little murky. There's numerous varying accounts, conflicting information, and unverified tales of the exact reasons why Tommy was killed, how it happened, and who was involved.
The 32-year-old DeSimone was given the promotion of becoming a made man in the Lucchese family, which was merely a setup. While it's unknown exactly where his demise took place, in Goodfellas it shows him being taken to a home where he was to have his induction ceremony, and there he was shot dead. This is the actual house used in the film where Tommy was brought to be killed.
It's been often repeated that DeSimone was killed in retribution for his killing of William Billy Bats Benvina, who was a made man and was also a good friend of John Gotti's. But it's unknown if Benvina was really a made man or as close to John Gotti as some claim.
An informant claimed that Angelo Seppi told him that Tommy was actually killed in retribution for the murder of Foxy Giroth.
Foxy was not only a respected earner who was confirmed to be close with John Gotti, who by now was a powerful and feared capo with the Gambino family, but Foxy was also the son of a mob associate. Another theory offered by Tommy's own family was that Tommy was killed due to him kidnapping and holding mobsters for ransom, along with his brother-in-law Joe Spione and a Colombo associate named Bobby Emilio, both of whom were killed in the 2 years prior to DeSimone's release from prison.
Another story states that Spione was killed because he was asked to lure DeSimone to his death but refused, and in July of 1978 he was killed and dismembered at Gotti's hangout in Queens, the Bergen and Hunt Fish Club.
While it appears that Tommy's killing was more motivated by his murder of Foxy Giroth rather than William Benvina, it's safe to say that Tommy wasn't killed for any one thing, but rather for the list of offenses that he accrued. As for who killed Tommy, not surprisingly, there's quite a few varying theories on that.
The more common belief is that Thomas Agro, the same man who was partners with Tommy's brother Bobby in Florida, was the one to kill him, while other accounts state that both John Gotti and Thomas Agro were involved in his slaying. In the 2004 book Gangsters and Goodfellas, Hill says that former Colombo family associate turned cooperator Sal Polisi told him that DeSimone was shot dead by John Gotti. Hill claimed that he didn't want to mention this while Gotti was still alive due to fear of retribution, although some are skeptical regarding Gotti's involvement in DeSimone's killing.
In an FBI notation, it states that Tommy may have been killed or abducted at a party which was held for him at a Ramada Inn and was machine gunned to death.
The 2013 book Mob Boss, co-written by Jerry Capisi and Tom Robbins, is based on information from Alphonse Little Al Diarco, the former acting boss of the Lucchese family and the first boss to become a government witness. Diarco points to DeSimone's former associates in the Lucchese family, Bruno Facciolo and Paul Vario's son Peter, as being involved in his murder. D'Arco claims that he last saw Tommy at a pizza parlor owned by Facciolo before he left with them and was never seen again.
There's also some theories that Tommy's own father figure and mentor, Jimmy Burke, may have been some way involved in his killing, either because he made the mistake of taking off his mask during the Lufthansa heist, or simply to appease all of those who were demanding that he be killed. Although Henry Hill's statements in Wise Guy contradicts that, as he says that when Burke heard that Tommy was killed, he began crying.
When Tommy failed to show up for parole hearings, he was listed as a violator and a fugitive from justice.
Although authorities speculated that Tommy may have been killed due to the fallout from the Lufthansa heist, they still followed up on leads that he was still alive. Information at a Lewisburg penitentiary said that he was in Canada. Other info said that he was in South Florida, and authorities had set up surveillance at a club named Luccheses in Tampa, believing that he was hanging out there. One informant claimed that he was alive and living in Vegas, while another informant claimed he was living on the island of Bimini. In Goodfellas, it shows the corpse of Frankie Carbone, the character based on Angelo Seppi, as being frozen stiff in a refrigerated meat truck. In real life, it was a restaurant and club owner named Richard Eaton, who Burke had accused of skimming money from the heist cash through the businesses that he laundered money through. In February of 1979, his hog-tied, frozen body was found in a refrigerated meat truck in Brooklyn.
Another one of those killed included a mistress of Tommy's named Teresa Ferrara, who disappeared from her place of work in Belmore, Long Island on February 10, 1979, and months later her dismembered body washed up ashore in Toms River, New Jersey. She may have been killed due to her involvement with laundering money or simply for having knowledge of the heist. The only one who would be convicted in the Lufthansa affair was their inside man, Louis Werner, thanks in large to his initial co-conspirator, Peter Grunwald, who cooperated against him. On May 16, 1979, Werner was convicted of several counts related to the robbery and would be sentenced to 15 years in prison. Just a day after Louis Werner's conviction on May 17, 1979, 42-year-old Robert Frenchie McMahon and 46-year-old Joe Manry were both found shot to death in the front seat of a Buick parked on a Brooklyn street.
By the summer of 1979, 7 months after the robbery, Burke had ordered the killing of 9 people, all of whom were either at the Lufthansa heist, had laundered money for them, or simply had knowledge of it.
Less than a year into Louis Werner's prison stint, he too decided to cooperate with authorities.
Henry Hill would later add yet another unverifiable twist to the tale of the demise of Tommy DeSimone. In Gangsters and Goodfellas, Hill claims that he didn't find out until 10 years after the fact that after Tommy was released from prison in 1978 and while he was still locked up, that Tommy had beaten up and attempted to rape his wife Karen. But there's something to note here. In that same book, Hill says that he was released from prison on July 12, 1978, which is more than 3 months before Tommy DeSimone was released from prison on October 18, 1978, as indicated by FBI records. And another twist, around that time, Karen was supposedly having an affair with Hill's own captain, Paul Vario. Hill also goes on to claim that after Vario found out about Tommy's supposed attempted rape on his mistress, Karen, that he was furious, and in turn informed the Gambinos that Tommy was the one responsible for the murder of Billy Batts, and gave his blessing for him to be killed. In June of 1980, relatives of Tommy's had told authorities that he was definitely dead, but they still maintained an active fugitive investigation into his whereabouts.
Also in June of 1980, authorities followed up on leads about bodies being buried in Robert's Lounge. They dug up the locations where an informant instructed them to dig, but only uncovered animal bones. However, there was evidence found at the site that indicated a human body had been there and might have been removed just a few days before investigators began digging. In August of 1980, Henry Hill and his wife Karen were arrested in a major drug ring bust in New York, and he was facing serious time. After his arrest, feds shared tapes with Hill of Angelo Seppi and Anthony Stabile on wiretap, speaking about their desire to kill him, and referred to him as a no-good junkie.
when Hill was shown a surveillance tape by federal investigators which showed Jimmy Burke discussing the need to have him killed. Soon afterwards, Hill became a government informant. He entered the witness protection program with his family and testified against his associates.
Hill's testimonies would help get 50 mobsters convicted of various crimes. Hill testified against Burke about his involvement in a major point-shaving scheme at Boston College. Hill's testimony got him convicted of racketeering and sports bribery charges related to the basketball scandal, and on January 22, 1982, Jimmy Burke was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Burke would also later be convicted at a separate trial for the 1979 beating and strangling death of Lufthansa accomplice Richard Eaton and sentenced to life in prison. Hill's testimonies would get Paul Vario convicted at 2 separate trials and sentenced to a total of 14 years in prison.
On May 10, 1982, 36-year-old Anthony Stabile was having a meeting with several others at around 4:30 a.m. on a residential street in Howard Beach, Queens, when they were ambushed by gunmen in a drive-by. Stabile and 2 others were killed while the 4th was severely wounded. Their murders may have been the result of a dispute over the profits of a Brooklyn discotheque. Louis Werner's cooperation with authorities got his sentence greatly reduced, and he was released in 1983 and entered the witness protection program with his family. In February of 1984, the FBI closed their fugitive investigation case of Tommy DeSimone and concluded that he was likely dead. However, the U.S. Marshals elected to keep their case on DeSimone open until his remains were found or a death certificate was supplied. On July 18, 1984, 42-year-old Angelo Seppi was shot several times in the face and killed in the basement of the Shore Haven Apartments in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, along with a 19-year-old female companion of his named Joanne Lombardo. Seppi was allegedly killed by members of his own family for robbing a Lucchese-affiliated drug dealer of thousands of dollars worth of money and cocaine. Seppi would be the 11th person connected to the Lufthansa heist that was either killed or missing.
Joseph Joe Dogs Iannuzzi also became a government witness. After being nearly beaten to death by Tommy DeSimone's suspected killer Thomas Agro several years earlier, he became an FBI informant and testified against numerous members of his old crew, including Bobby DeSimone.
Due to Iannuzzi's testimony in 1986, Bobby DeSimone and Thomas Agro were among 16 mobsters who were indicted on numerous charges, including racketeering and conspiracy. Bobby was charged with bribing officials to get preferential treatment for him and his associates, which included the chief of police, William Darden, who was indicted alongside with them. Darden had been on the Gambino's payroll and was feeding them inside information as well as protecting their gambling operations. Bobby was convicted and sentenced to 5 years for bribery. 57-year-old Thomas Agro, who was gravely ill with lung and liver cancer, pled guilty to the charges from his hospital bed. He was facing 40 years in prison but died before he could be sentenced.
Henry Hill went back to his old ways, and in May of 1987, he was arrested for narcotics conspiracy and was subsequently expelled from the witness protection program. He continued his drug and alcohol abuse and had several run-ins with the law. Also in May of 1987, Jimmy Burke's 27-year-old son, Frank Burke, was shot dead outside of a bar in East New York, Brooklyn. Soon afterwards, his drug partner was arrested and charged with his murder. Paul Vario died from respiratory failure at the age of 73 on May 3, 1988, while serving out his sentence at Fort Worth Federal Prison in Texas. On August 24, 1990, Bruno Facciolo, who was DeSimone's old associate going back to the 60s and may have also been involved in his killing, was killed himself. The corrupt cops known as the Mafia Cops, Stephen Caracappa and Louis Ippolito, were feeding inside information to Lucchese capo Anthony Gaspipe Casso. They informed Casso that Bruno was planning to cooperate with authorities, and Casso then informed boss Vic Amuso, who ordered Facciolo to be killed. Facciolo was lured to an auto body shop in Brooklyn under the ruse of a meeting, and there Lucchese mobsters Louis Bagels Dadone, Frank Lastarino, and Richard Pagliarulo held him down, stabbed him, and shot him dead. Afterwards, Facciolo's body was left in the trunk of a car with a canary stuffed in his mouth as a message that he was cooperating. It was later revealed that Facciolo was not cooperating with authorities and was likely killed based on false information from the mafia cops or simply due to paranoia from Casso and Amuso. Interestingly enough, mafia cop Louis Eppolito had a cameo in Goodfellas. Due to the testimony of Alphonse D'Arco, Louis Dadone would be convicted of Facciolo's murder. Anthony Casso also became an informant, and he and D'Arco's testimonies would get numerous Lucchese mobsters convicted of various crimes, including boss Vic Amuso, who was sentenced to life in prison. Information provided by Casso and others would later get the mafia cops put away for life. Jimmy Burke died from throat cancer at the age of 65 on April 16, 1996, while serving out his sentence at Wend Correctional Facility in Alden, New York. After coming out of hiding, Henry Hill made numerous media appearances before passing away at the age of 69 on June 12, 2012. None of the money from the Lufthansa heist has ever been recovered.
Nobody has ever been charged with the killing of Tommy DeSimone, and his remains have never been located. In 1990, the FBI declared him legally dead. Every so often, a gangster like Tommy DeSimone becomes a figure of nearly mythological proportions and provides the kind of unbelievable tale that movies are made out of. Joe Pesci's interpretation of him in Goodfellas left an indelible image in the minds of mob fans and movie fans alike.
Funny how? I mean, what's funny about it?
Tommy DeSimone was undoubtedly a treacherous criminal whose life story includes a trail of murder and mayhem. But it's also a story that includes its share of falsehoods, embellishments, and unanswered questions. Many of the events from Tommy DeSimone's life came from accounts as told by Henry Hill, and some of those events lack the evidence to confirm their occurrences, while other events appear to have been dressed up with some fabrication. Perhaps Henry Hill took some creative liberties in enhancing his own criminal career, which he could further enhance by amplifying the reputations of his partners in crime. Some will take Hill at his word, while others will point to a junkie and alcoholic who turned on his associates as hardly being a person to trust. Hill claims that Joe Pesci's portrayal of Tommy DeSimone was 90% accurate. But then again, that portrayal is based on Hill's very own account of him. Whatever the case, Tommy DeSimone was a dangerous hoodlum who had a frightening reputation during his career as a mobster. He took part in the crime of the century, and together with his mentor Jimmy Burke, they left a legacy of violence and theft throughout their careers in organized crime. Lingering questions about the wild life and death of Tommy DeSimone will remain, but his legacy will continue to trigger the imaginations of all of those who encountered his tale.